Right now, somewhere off the Irish coast, a Russian ship is sitting almost directly over the cables that carry a huge share of the world's internet across the Atlantic. It calls itself an oceanographic research vessel. It carries deep diving submersibles and underwater drones, and Western navies have watched it loiter over one undersea cable after another, quietly mapping exactly where a single cut would do the most damage. When it slipped into the Irish Sea, it was not the Irish Navy that chased it off, because Irish ships do not carry sonar. When Russian bombers fly into Irish-controlled airspace with their transponders switched off, it is not the Irish Air Corps that climbs up to meet them, because Ireland does not own a single fighter jet. Both of those jobs fall to the British. If someone actually came for Ireland tomorrow, could this country defend itself at all? Or has it quietly agreed to let somebody else do the fighting? I will let you decide. This is everything Ireland would bring to that fight. We begin with the fighting vehicles. Piranha. Ireland has never owned a main battle tank. Not one, in the entire history of the state. The heaviest thing its army can field is this 8-wheeled Swiss armored car. And if that sounds like a weakness, the design itself is anything but. The Piranha is the most successful line of wheeled armor ever built, and the United States Army thought so highly of it that it became the basis for the Striker. Its hardest day came in the opening ground battle of the Gulf War, at a Saudi border town called Khafji, when Iraqi tanks pushed south in the dark and slammed into American Marine light armored vehicles built on the same design. The Marines stopped them. 11 died doing it, 7 of them in a single vehicle when a jet overhead mistook it for the enemy and fired straight through it. This is what Irish soldiers ride into places like Lebanon and Chad, and for now it is the hardest steel the country has. Rolls-Royce. Long before any of that, the Irish Army rode into its very first battles behind the armor of a luxury car maker, and one of those machines is still running today. In August of 1922, at a lonely bend in West Cork called Beal na Blath, this exact type of armored Rolls-Royce was escorting Michael Collins, the man who had just built the Free State Army. When his convoy drove into an ambush, Collins climbed out and traded rifle fire from behind the car. The gun in its turret jammed at the worst possible moment. The gunner later switched sides and handed the whole vehicle over to the enemy, and Collins was shot dead in the road. The car survived all of it. A workshop foreman hid it from the scrapyard for years by writing it down as junk. And today, it is recognized as the oldest armored vehicle still serving anywhere on Earth, driven under its own power at parades by the same army it was born into. Ford F-350. Ireland's Special Forces are the Army Ranger Wing, and when they go looking for trouble far from home, they do it in stripped-down American pickup trucks like this one, bristling with weapons and radios and built to vanish into open country. What gives them away, oddly enough, is the steering wheel. Ireland drives on the left, yet these trucks are left-hand drive, because they were never really meant for Irish roads. They were meant for the deserts and the dust of the places the Rangers actually deploy, riding out ahead of everyone else to find the enemy and slip back out before anyone knows they were there. It is the oldest job in soldiering, done from the newest truck in the fleet. Next up is the engineering and support vehicles, EOD. Ireland fought a long shadow war on its own island, and the leftovers of it never fully went away. Decades of homemade bombs, hidden arms caches, and unstable old devices turned the Irish Army's bomb disposal teams into some of the most experienced on the continent, called out again and again to make safe the kind of thing that kills the careless. They roll to those jobs in armored trucks like this one and work from behind remote-controlled robots, because the whole craft is built on a single idea, that no device is ever worth a technician's hands. Nobody makes films about it, but on any given week in Ireland, it is the most likely reason a soldier gets pulled out of bed at 3 in the morning. Scania trucks. Every story about tanks and jets and missiles quietly skips the truth that armies do not actually run on any of them. They run on trucks, on the endless gray convoys hauling fuel and food and ammunition up to the men who need it. And Ireland's convoys are mostly these Swedish machines. The clever ones can drop a whole loaded cargo bed onto the ground and grab a fresh one in minutes, so a single truck keeps moving instead of sitting idle waiting to be unloaded. Plain as they look, they matter enough that when Ukraine needed help, Ireland loaded fleets of them onto ships and sent them east to keep another army rolling. War is logistics wearing a uniform, and this is what that actually looks like. Moving on to artillery, light gun. Irish artillery begins and ends with the towed gun, and the one it leans on is a British design that earned its name in a war fought at the bottom of the world. In the Falklands in 1982, a handful of these guns were flown ashore by helicopter and dug into the peat to support paratroopers assaulting Argentine positions at a place called Goose Green. The ground was so bad and the supply line so thin that the crews had to ration shells while the infantry screamed for more. Those guns fired through the cold and the dark for the length of that campaign, and the men on the receiving end never forgot what a battery of them could do to a hillside. Mortars. When an Irish rifle company needs its own artillery and there is no battery in range, it reaches for the mortar, a simple tube that lobs a bomb up and over onto a target the rifleman cannot even see. The heaviest of them drops a shell wide enough to gut a house, and the lightest can be carried by 2 men and set up in under a minute. There is nothing modern or clever about the idea. It is one of the oldest tricks in war. A high arcing shot that falls straight down out of the sky onto the man who thought a wall or a ridgeline was keeping him safe, and has killed more infantry across more wars than almost anything else a foot soldier carries. That brings us to air defense. RBS-70. Here's where the honesty gets uncomfortable. This shoulder-braced Swedish missile, fired off a tripod by a 2-man team, is very nearly the entire ground-based air defense of the Irish state. There is no missile shield over Dublin, no network of radar sweeping the sky for incoming aircraft, nothing that reaches high or far. What the RBS-70 does have is a clever trick. Instead of chasing an aircraft's engine heat, which a pilot can throw off with flares, it rides a laser beam straight to the target. And there is no flare and no jammer on Earth that fools a beam of light. It is a genuinely good weapon. There are just nowhere near enough of them, aimed at a sky far too big for them to ever cover. Next up are the aircraft. PC-9. Ireland does not own a fighter. It does not own an attack jet or an interceptor, or anything built to shoot another aircraft out of the sky. The most warlike machine in the entire Air Corps is this Swiss turboprop trainer, the plane young pilots learn to fly on, fitted with hardpoints that can carry gun pods and rockets if it ever came to that. Around the world, these little turboprops have flown real attack missions in real counterinsurgencies, slow and low over the enemy, where a fast jet would be wasted. Ireland's have never fired a shot in anger, and that is rather the point. When the sharp end of your air power is a training aircraft with bolt-on guns, you are not planning to win the sky. You are planning to borrow it from a friend. C-295. Out over the cold Atlantic, this is the aircraft that actually goes to meet the Russians. When that spy ship sat off the coast mapping the cables, it was one of these that flew the long hours overhead, watching it, photographing it, tracking it back out of Irish waters. It is a maritime patrol plane, a flying pair of eyes for a navy that cannot be everywhere at once, packed with radar and sensors to pick a ship or a submarine's periscope out of a very large and very empty ocean. It cannot sink anything. It cannot shoot anything down. What it can do is see, and for a country with this much water to watch, and this few ships to watch it with, seeing first is most of the job. AW-139. In any small military, the medium helicopter does a bit of everything. And this Italian machine is one of the best-selling of its kind anywhere in the world. Irish ones move troops, fly ministers, lift casualties off mountainsides, and can be fitted with door guns when a mission calls for teeth. On a bad night on the West Coast, when the weather has turned and someone is in the water, it is often one of these coming out of the dark with a winch and a swimmer on the wire. Not every aircraft in a fleet has to be a killer. Some of them just have to show up when everything has gone wrong, and this one does. Orbiter. Everything you have watched change the war in Ukraine, the cheap flying robots that find targets and drop grenades and hunt men through the tree lines, Ireland has almost none of it. What the Artillery Corps does field is this: a small hand-launched Israeli reconnaissance drone that buzzes overhead and sends back a video feed so the gunners can see where their rounds are landing. It is a modest, useful little machine. It is also set against what unmanned aircraft now do in a real war. A quiet reminder of just how far behind a small, neutral army can fall while the rest of the world sprints ahead. Then we come to the small arms. AUG. When Ireland adopted this Austrian rifle, it looked like something out of a science fiction film. A stubby green bullpup with a magazine sitting behind the trigger and a built-in optic while everyone else was still squinting down iron sights. People laughed at the look. They stopped laughing when it worked. By folding the action back into the stock, It packs a full-length barrel into a much shorter weapon, easy to swing around inside a vehicle or a doorway, and versions of it have been carried by soldiers from Australia to the Irish sections patrolling South Lebanon. It is built under license on Irish soil, which makes it one of the very few weapons in this whole video the country can actually produce for itself. USP. A sidearm is the weapon a soldier hopes never to need. The thing you reach for only when the rifle is empty or broken and the trouble is already close. Ireland's is a German pistol designed in the 1990s to be almost impossible to kill, tested by being dropped, frozen, buried in sand and mud, and fired thousands of times without a proper clean, and it just kept running. A Special Forces cousin of this same pistol was built to a United States Commando specification, so brutal that it had to keep firing after being run over and soaked in salt water. It wins no wars on its own, and it was never meant to. It is simply the last thing standing between a man and a very bad afternoon. MP5. There's one weapon on this list the whole world recognizes without ever knowing its name, and it belongs to the men of the Army Ranger Wing. On a spring afternoon in 1980, British commandos abseiled down the front of the Iranian embassy in London, blew the windows in, and went room to room with this exact German submachine gun while the whole thing played out live on television. In a matter of minutes, it was over, and every counter-terror unit on the planet decided it wanted the same weapon. Compact, controllable, and deadly accurate up close, it became the tool of choice for the job, where you have to go through the door not knowing what is waiting on the other side. Minimi. Between the rifle every man carries and the heavy gun, the whole squad shares sits the light machine gun. And this Belgian one gave a single soldier the firepower that used to take a whole team. Belt-fed and quick to move, it hangs off the hip on the advance and drops onto its bipod the second the shooting starts, throwing out a wall of automatic fire to pin the enemy while the riflemen close in. It rode through the worst of the fighting in the irrigation ditches of Helmand and the alleys of a dozen other wars. Because when a small unit gets caught in the open, the volume of fire it can put down in the first few seconds is very often the difference between walking out and not. MAG. Every rifle squad needs one gun that does the heavy talking, the belt-fed machine gun that pins the enemy's head down while everyone else moves. And for most of the free world across the last 60 years, that gun has been this Belgian one. It is heavy, it is loud, and it is spectacularly reliable, chewing through belt after belt in the mud and the dust of every kind of war there is. Gunners curse its weight on the long march and bless it the second the shooting starts. Set it on a tripod and it reaches clear across a valley. Carry it into a close fight and it becomes the sound that tells the other side to keep their heads down or lose them. M2 Browning. Some weapons get replaced every few years. This one has been on the job for the better part of a century. An American named John Browning designed this .50 caliber machine gun at the end of the First World War. And the same basic gun is still bolted to Irish trucks and Irish warships today, still doing exactly what it was built to do. Soldiers call it the Ma Deuce, and they trust it the way you trust something that has simply always worked, punching through walls, engine blocks, and light armor with a round the size of a man's finger. A great-grandfather and his great-grandson could have fired the very same design in uniform, generations apart, and neither would have found much to complain about. FAL. They called it the right arm of the free world, the big 7.62 battle rifle that armed most of the West through the Cold War. And its strangest day came in a war where both sides carried it. In the Falklands, British troops advanced with a version of this exact rifle, while the Argentine soldiers dug in on the ridgelines, fired back with their own, the same design pointed in opposite directions across the same freezing hills. Ireland keeps a handful in service today, in the hands of its designated marksmen, the men who reach a little further and shoot a little straighter than the rest of the section. The rifle is older than most of the soldiers carrying it, and it still does that one job better than most of what came along to replace it. AWM. A sniper's rifle is the one weapon on this list built entirely around a single idea that one calm person, hidden and patient, can be worth more than a whole squad. Ireland's is a British-made bolt action chambered for a heavy long-range round, and rifles from this exact maker in this exact caliber hold the record that snipers argue about in every army on Earth. In Afghanistan in 2009, a British marksman, using one, dropped 2 enemy fighters from over 1.5 miles away, so far that the bullets hung in the air for the better part of 6 seconds before they arrived. The physics says a shot like that should be very nearly impossible. A rifle like this one, in the right hands, made it twice in a row. Carl Gustav. Somewhere out past the rifles, an infantry section still needs an answer to a wall, a bunker, or an armored vehicle bearing down on it. And for Irish troops, one of those answers is this Swedish shoulder-fired recoilless gun. You load it from the back, brace it on your shoulder, and it throws a fist-sized charge hard enough to punch through a bunker wall or crack open light armor. Then you drop it and grab the next round. Soldiers have leaned on this weapon for generations, precisely because it is simple, reusable, and it does not much care whether the thing in front of it is concrete or steel. When you do not have tanks of your own, being able to hurt someone else's matters a great deal. Javelin. Of everything Ireland has bought in years, nothing arrived with a bigger reputation than this American anti-tank missile. You have seen its work even if you never knew the name, in the grainy footage out of Ukraine where a Russian tank column sits burning by the side of the road. The Javelin climbs up and comes down through the thin roof armor on the top of a tank, the one place even the heaviest machine is weakest, so a single soldier on foot can kill a vehicle worth 100 times as much and simply walk away. It became such a symbol of the little man stopping the giant that people started painting an icon of it and calling it St. Javelin. For an army with no tanks that might one day have to fight tanks, that is exactly the sort of weapon you want sitting in the cupboard. And finally, the ships. Beckett class. Ireland's navy is, once you strip away the flag and the ceremony, essentially a coast guard with guns, and these gray ships are the core of it. The government named them after the country's great writers, Beckett, Joyce, Yeats, and Shaw, and caught a fair bit of mockery for putting Nobel winners on the bows of warships. The mockery misses the point, because these are the ships that do the real work, the ones that shadow the Russian warships, escort the spy vessels back out past the edge of Irish waters, and patrol a stretch of ocean many times the size of the island itself. They were built to chase trawlers and smugglers. Lately, they have found themselves watching for something a great deal more dangerous. Otto Melara. Bolted to the front of those patrol ships is an Italian gun, so good that navies all over the world use it. A rapid-fire cannon that can throw shells at aircraft, missiles, and other ships faster than the eye can follow. On paper, it gives the Irish fleet a real punch. Then reality intrudes. Not long ago, one of Ireland's own ships had to put to sea with this very gun sitting dead and useless because the Navy had run so short of trained technicians that there was no one left aboard qualified to make it work. A first-class weapon is only ever as good as the people kept on to run it. And that single silent gun said more about the state of the service than any speech ever could. Lake class. Ireland's two newest warships are not new at all. They are hand-me-downs, bought secondhand from New Zealand, sailed halfway around the planet, given Irish names, and put to work patrolling the Irish Sea. Their main job is to watch the fishing grounds that got complicated after Britain walked out of the European Union. Small ships for close-in water. There is something quietly telling in it. One of the wealthiest countries in Europe, sitting on top of the cables that carry the world's money and messages, patrols its own front door with another navy's cast-offs. That is not an accident. And it is not bad luck. It is a choice this country has made over and over for a very long time. And the ships in this video are what that choice looks like on the water.